Hey guys, what's going on? So I just wanted to cover the life of Luke Skywalker. I am going to be hitting on both Canon and Legends material, and then I'm just going to give some thoughts and analysis on his character development overall and what I think would be really great for him going forward in terms of future projects. So starting off, we know that Luke was born in Revenge of the Sith. You have Padme dying in childbirth, and that's really where we have Kenobi, in addition to Yoda, deciding to separate them at birth and pretty much put them both into hiding. So you have Kenobi taking Luke to Tatooine, and really the first glimpse of Luke that we get is at age 6. That's where he uses the Force for the first time. We get an instance of this, of him just finding a screwdriver underneath the couch, and he's able to use the Force to collect it and find it, which is really what triggers anger from Uncle Owen. This is a recurring theme throughout Luke's childhood. And then we also see him at age 10. This is his age in Kenobi. You don't really have a whole lot of Luke in here since we have a little bit more focus on Leia, if anything. But we really have Kenobi still being around in Tatooine, and we see just a few glimpses of Luke there. And we know that going into his teenage years, Luke really liked to race around Tatooine in his land speeder. He was pretty reckless, would like to just kind of drive fast, and is really adventurous. You pretty much have the side of Anakin that was a pod racer being brought out in this form, and Luke would really just do this a lot with his friends and kind of travel freely throughout the desert. And then going into his later teenage years, we see him at age 19 in A New Hope. And that's really where Luke is starting to crack in terms of his life on the farm. Really is having aspirations of doing something more with his life. And then we eventually get his story propelling forward. That's when you see Kenobi start to reveal a little bit more information into his father, into the Jedi. That's where you see him first ignite a lightsaber. And then we later get the journey of Luke actually leaving and really going through all of these aspirations that he has, becoming a catalyst for the rebellion. So he's able to destroy the Death Star after losing Kenobi, or Kenobi having his sacrifice to Vader. So we really get Luke being pushed forward pretty fast. And then we next see him at age 22 in Empire Strikes Back. That's where we get Luke starting his training with Yoda. And then later in the movie, we get that big reveal and fight with Vader. And we really get a continue of this the year after. So Luke would be 23 in Return of the Jedi. And we see Luke really starting to mature, the rebellion really rallying again against the Empire, and then we get Luke turning himself into both Vader and the Emperor, and that's where we get Vader's redemption and Luke really committing to the light side of the Force, or being a Jedi. So here, not only is he able to redeem himself, but also his father, and this is really the finale for the original Star Wars as we know it. So we see peace being brought back to the galaxy, and then just given a few instances we see later in the sequels, we can infer back that the training sequence in the flashback scenes with Luke and Leia that would happen just about 6 months to a year after the events of Return of the Jedi. So he'd probably be a little bit closer to 24 or 24 at this time. And then the next major thing is that we see him in The Mandalorian, his surprise appearance in season 2. And that's where Luke comes to rescue Grogu, and we later see him taking him to his Jedi Academy, which he is just starting to build. And we see again a continuation of this in the Book of Boba Fett. You get a few scenes with Luke and Grogu there, but we of course know that Grogu reunites with Din. But going more into Legends material now, this is also around the same age where Luke starts his Jedi Academy to really continue the Jedi's legacy, since he is pretty much the last Jedi not in reference to episode 8, but in terms of where he was in the original trilogy, where he was at Return of the Jedi. So it really would fall upon him after both Kenobi and Yoda's death. So he's about 30 to 31 when he starts the academy in Legends, and this is really where he would continue his reign as a Jedi. We see him getting more into his peak self, and this is really the closest instance to what Anakin would have been like if he never turned to the dark side, if he was able to reach his prime. We see that play out through Luke in a lot of the Legends material here, but just jumping back to canon again, following the sequel storyline, we know that about age 34 is where he takes Ben Solo as his apprentice. And then jumping back into Legends, you get the big plot point with Mara Jade start to develop here. So eventually leading into age 38 is when he would marry her. So this is where he has a son with Mara Jade. This would be Ben. And then following some of those flashbacks and just what we know going into the sequels, we know that at age 47 in canon, this is where he starts having a lot of the doubts about Ben Solo and really can sense his dark thoughts. And this is what really leads to Ben now turning into Kylo Ren, discovering this, and then burning down the Jedi Temple and kind of forcing Luke into exile just due to this traumatic experience. And then following this into Legends, we really see Luke probably a little bit past his prime at this point, but still not only being a teacher to the new Jedi, but also partaking as a strong warrior and leader on the battlefield as well. So he would really continue a powerful reign as a warrior late into his 40s in Legends and even beyond that. So we see a lot of that here. And then we see him become a Grandmaster at age 48 to really continue the Jedi's legacy there. You also have the plot points of both Jacen and Jaina Solo being pretty similar to both Kylo and Rey in canon. And Jacen and Jaina would both be his nephew and niece. Two twins there. You have one of them, Jacen, falling to the dark side, who is later defeated by twin sister Jaina. And you have Luke playing a big mentorship role there with Jaina. And then continuing more just into the canon timeline, you have his age in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi being 53. And we know that The Last Jedi pretty much takes place just right after The Force Awakens. And this is also where he decides to become one with the Force after creating a distraction for both Rey and the Resistance to escape. But we have in Legends him lasting a little bit longer than that. Pretty similar in terms of just deciding to naturally pass away into the Force. But you have this at age 64 in Legends, and this is really just because he believed that the Jedi Order was capable of continuing itself. So now just my overall thoughts on Luke's character. I think a lot of times now we really think of the heart and soul of Star Wars being with Anakin, since we've seen his full arc over 6 films. But I think you really have, just focusing on the original trilogy because that's where it all started, I think you really have Luke Skywalker being the true face and the true heart of Star Wars. And even though you have Vader being the one to save Luke in terms of defeating Palpatine, you really have Luke being the one to undergo the hero's journey, to really double down on the light side of the Force, and really to be the one to redeem and convince his father to turn back to the light in the end. So you really have Luke, I think, being that real magic in terms of what you think of for Star Wars. So I think that's something that's just often forgotten. And I think another thing that makes Luke really great is also his other half in terms of his twin sister Leia, because they really are the best duo. Even though you have Luke being the heart of Star Wars and really being the one to bring peace to the galaxy, you really have Leia doing that too. And I think eventually just leading into more of that source material, whether we're overlapping with Legends or not, you have Luke really becoming the pride of the Jedi and the new leader of the Jedi, but you also have that with Leia being the overall leader of the rebellion. So I think that's a nice little rhyme there that is thrown in there. And just some other overall thoughts on Luke's character. I think it's really interesting that you have a lot of parallels to George Lucas himself, because we know that George really grew up in kind of a more hotter area, a more agricultural based area, pretty much like a desert, like in terms of Tatooine. And you really have Luke Skywalker as a kid being a projection of himself, as we know that George Lucas described that he really loved to race cars and drive around his town growing up, and was pretty reckless. You even have him describing a pretty horrific accident that he was lucky to be alive and walk away from. This is really what propelled him to pivot from wanting to become a NASCAR driver to going to USC and taking up film and screenwriting. And in terms of future projects for Luke, I think you have a great gap there, especially in what's covered in the Legends material in terms of Luke really starting the Jedi Order and becoming a great leader and a really great warrior into his more mature years. I think that would be great to see play out in some shape or fashion. You get a little bit of a preview of this, I think, in both The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. You have some glimpses of definitely the potential of what this could look like, and you see that with a lot of this new de-aging technology. And in terms of maybe some new movies that are going to come out, you're going to have more of Luke Skywalker maybe in The Mandalorian and Grogu, maybe another Star Wars movie that might focus on him, or he'll be a side character that'll show up in there. But I think if none of this is the case, just given what's been done with the Clone Wars or Bad Batch, I think just using the more animated style could also be a good avenue for filling in this missing piece to Luke's story. I think a lot of that could be a neat project of some sort, just to really fill in that last piece, because we know that Luke is really just a huge symbol of hope. So I think it would really be great to see Luke spreading that hope more to others in the form of being a great teacher. So feel free to let me know any of your thoughts on this. Really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you later.